My wife called me a boring anchor and handed me divorce papers to escape our quiet life, but I soon discovered the terrifying truth. I wasn't just her husband, I was her hand-picked fall guy for a global crime syndicate. I used to believe that marriage was a marathon, a long-distance race where you supported your partner through the cramps, the exhaustion, and the moments when they wanted to collapse by the side of the road. For 12 years, I was the one holding the water bottle. I was the one cheering from the sidelines, and for a long time, I was the one carrying Elena's weight when her own legs gave out. We were a team, or so I thought. But as it turns out, when some people reach the finish line, the first thing they want to do is celebrate with a crowd that didn't see them sweating in the mud. My name is Mark, and until 6 months ago, I thought I was a happily married man. I'm a senior architect at a mid-sized firm. It's a good job, stable and well-paying, but it's not glamorous. It doesn't involve private jets or 5-course galas. Elena, on the other hand, had spent a decade trying to find her niche. She jumped from boutique PR to high-end interior design, and finally, 3 years ago, she launched Vanguard Solutions, a luxury lifestyle and corporate consulting firm. In the beginning, I was the sole breadwinner. I paid for her office space, her initial branding, and the designer suits she said she needed to look the part. I didn't mind. I loved her, and I believed in her. I remember nights we spent sitting on the floor of our modest apartment, eating takeout Chinese food, while she sketched out her visions of grandeur. "When I make it, Mark," she used to say, her eyes shining, "we're gonna see the world. Just you and me." Then she actually made it. The shift happened gradually, then all at once. About 18 months ago, Elena landed a massive contract with a multinational tech conglomerate. Suddenly, Vanguard Solutions wasn't just a dream, it was a powerhouse. Our modest apartment was replaced by a penthouse overlooking the city. My reliable SUV was joined in the garage by her sleek, matte black Italian sports car. But as her bank account swelled, her warmth evaporated. She started staying out late, claiming networking was the lifeblood of her industry. When she did come home, she was a stranger. She looked at our old life, and by extension, me, with a sort of polished disdain. She stopped asking about my day. When I tried to talk about a project I was proud of, she'd check her watch or respond with a biting, "That's nice, Mark, but I have a $3 million acquisition to finalize by morning. I really don't have the headspace for blueprints right now." The team was dead. I was just a ghost, haunting her new, expensive life. The breaking point came last Tuesday. I had spent all afternoon cooking. It was our 12th anniversary, a milestone I thought might finally pierce the icy veil she'd draped over our relationship. I'd made beef bourguignon, opened a bottle of the wine we'd shared on our honeymoon, and dimmed the lights. I wanted to remind her of who we were before the money, before the vanguard of it all. She walked in 2 hours late. She didn't even take off her coat. She just stood in the entryway looking at the candle-lit table like it was a crime scene. "What is this, Mark?" she asked, her voice flat. "It's our anniversary, Elle. 12 years. I thought we could just be together. No phones, no clients." She sighed, a long, weary sound that made me feel 2 inches tall. She dropped her Hermes bag on the counter and walked over to the table, but she didn't sit down. "Mark, we need to talk. And honestly, this domestic bliss routine you're trying to pull is making this harder than it needs to be." My heart hammered against my ribs. Harder? What are you talking about? She reached into her bag and pulled out a manila envelope. She slid it across the mahogany table, right next to the plate of food I'd spent 4 hours preparing. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. The letterhead of a very prominent, very expensive law firm was visible through the plastic window. "I'm filing for divorce," she said, her voice devoid of any tremor. "I've had my team draw up the papers. It's a generous settlement, considering. You keep the old house in the suburbs we bought together and a significant cash payout." I felt like the floor had been pulled out from under me. 12 years, Elena. You're ending 12 years over a dinner table. "Don't be melodramatic," she snapped. "We've outgrown each other. Look at us, Mark. I'm operating on a global scale. I'm moving in circles you can't even imagine. You're still designing community centers and suburban libraries. We don't speak the same language anymore. You're an anchor, and I'm ready to sail. I need a partner who matches my ambition, not someone who wants to sit around eating stew and reminiscing about the days when we were poor. I looked at the woman I had built a life with, the woman I had supported when she had nothing, and I realized I didn't recognize the person standing in front of me. She wasn't just leaving, she was erasing me. She was treating our marriage like an outdated software update that she was finally deleting to make room for something faster. "So that's it?" I whispered. "I'm just an anchor?" "You're a good man, Mark, but you're a local man. I'm a global woman. Let's not make this ugly. Sign the papers, take the money, and find someone who wants the quiet life you're so fond of." She turned and walked toward the bedroom, leaving me alone in the flickering candlelight. I didn't cry. I was past that. I was in a state of cold, vibrating shock. I picked up the envelope, but as I moved it, I noticed a flash of white under the credenza where she'd dropped her bag. It was a small, high-capacity USB drive that must have fallen out of her purse when she tossed it down. I shouldn't have picked it up. I should have just left it there, signed the papers, and walked away with my dignity. But the way she had looked at me, like I was a bug she'd accidentally stepped on, burned in my gut. I went to my small office in the back of the penthouse, the only room that still felt like mine, and plugged the drive into my laptop. I expected to see client lists, marketing strategies, or maybe just boring corporate spreadsheets. Instead, the drive was encrypted. That was strange. Elena was smart, but she wasn't military-grade encryption smart. Or at least, she hadn't used to be. It took me nearly 3 hours of using an old recovery bypass I'd learned back in my college tech support days to get in. When the folders finally popped open, my blood ran cold. There were no consulting contracts here. There were folders labeled with the names of offshore shell companies, names I recognized from recent news reports about a massive international money laundering investigation. I clicked on a file titled Project Phoenix. It wasn't a business plan. It was a ledger that showed millions of dollars flowing through Vanguard Solutions. But the sources of the money weren't tech giants or luxury brands. They were names linked to some of the most shadow-drenched organizations in Eastern Europe. And then a notification pinged on the corner of my screen. Not my notification, hers. Since the drive was synced to her cloud account, her messages were briefly mirroring onto my desktop. A message appeared from a contact listed only as V. "The auditor is asking too many questions about the Jakarta transfer. If you can't silence him by Friday, we'll have to use the contingency plan. And remember, Elena, your husband is the perfect fall guy if the feds come knocking. That's why we chose him, isn't it?" My breath hitched in my throat as I stared at the screen. I wasn't just being discarded. I was being set up. I looked back at the divorce papers on the table in the other room. Suddenly, the generous settlement felt a lot more like a death warrant. Just as I was about to copy the files, I heard the click of high heels on the hardwood floor outside my door. The handle turned. The click of the door handle sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. My heart did a violent somersault against my ribs. With a reflex born of pure, unadulterated panic, I yanked the USB drive from the port and slammed my laptop shut. The sudden darkness of the screen left me momentarily blinded. The after image of the Fall Guy message burned into my retinas like a brand. Elena stepped into the room. She hadn't changed out of her power suit. In the dim glow of the streetlights filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she looked less like my wife and more like a predatory statue. Her eyes, usually a warm hazel I'd spent a decade adoring, were now 2 chips of cold flint. "You're still up," she said. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "I couldn't sleep," I managed to say, my voice sounding thin and reedy to my own ears. "A lot on my mind, Elle. You know, with the whole destroying our life thing you did at dinner." She walked further into the room, her gaze sweeping over my desk. She was looking for something. My hand, buried in my pocket, squeezed the small metal USB drive until the edges bit into my palm. "I left a drive in the kitchen," she said, her voice dropping into a dangerously low register. "A silver one, high capacity. I need it for a call with Singapore in 20 minutes. Have you seen it?" "I haven't been in the kitchen since the talk," I lied. The lie felt heavy in my mouth, a jagged stone I couldn't swallow. "Maybe you left it in your bag." She didn't move. She just stared at me, the silence stretching out until it felt like the air was being sucked out of the room. I realized then that she wasn't just my wife anymore. She was a threat. The woman who used to share my bed and my secrets was now a person who could calculate my disposal with the same clinical efficiency she used for a tax write-off. "You're acting strange, Mark," she said, taking a step closer. The scent of her expensive perfume, something musky and sharp, filled the small space. "You've always been a terrible liar. Your left eye twitches when you're hiding something. It's twitching now." "My life is falling apart, Elena. Of course I'm twitching," I snapped, trying to channel my fear into a more believable anger. "You just handed me divorce papers and called me an anchor. You'll forgive me if I'm not exactly composed." She studied me for a long beat, her expression unreadable. For a second, I thought she was going to lung for my pocket. Instead, she just tilted her head. "I suppose that's fair. Get some sleep, Mark. You'll need your energy for the move. I want you out by the weekend." She turned on her heel and vanished back into the hallway. I didn't move for 10 minutes. I stayed frozen in my chair, listening to the muffled sounds of her moving through the penthouse, the clink of a glass, the low murmur of her voice on the phone, the eventual silence of the master bedroom door closing. I waited another hour before I dared to open my laptop again. I didn't plug the drive back in, not yet. I needed to see what she had already planted on my machine. If I was the fall guy, the evidence wouldn't just be on her drive, it would be on my hard drive, hidden in folders I never checked, waiting for a forensic team to find it. I ran a deep system scan, bypassing the standard user interface. My hands were shaking so badly I had to keep pausing to wipe the sweat on my jeans. As the progress bar crawled across the screen, I felt a sickening sense of vertigo. Every memory of the last 3 years started to shift, viewed through a new, distorted lens. The business trips she insisted I take to visit my parents, were those just windows of time for her to use my computer? The documents she asked me to sign for the insurance on the new house, were those actually the shell company incorporations? The scan finished with a soft chime. My blood turned to ice. There were dozens of them, encrypted subfolders buried inside my architectural rendering software. I opened one. It was a digital paper trail that looked like a roadmap to a federal prison. There were scanned copies of my signature on wire transfer authorizations for millions of dollars, transfers to banks in Cyprus, the Cayman Islands, and a private entity in Russia. But it was the dates that broke me. These weren't recent. This had been going on for 2 years. She hadn't just decided I was an anchor last Tuesday. She had been building a cage around me for years, using my stability and my clean record as the perfect camouflage for her global ambitions. I wasn't just her husband. I was her insurance policy. If Vanguard Solutions ever got caught, Elena would walk away as the unknowing wife, while I, the man whose name was on every illicit document, would take the fall for a massive international money laundering scheme. I clicked into a folder labeled Correspondence. Inside were PDF exports of emails sent from an account in my name, an account I had never opened. They were addressed to V, the same contact from the message I'd seen earlier. V, the Mark I account is primed. He's totally oblivious. If the audit hits, we trigger the Phoenix Protocol. He'll look like the mastermind, and I'll play the victimized spouse. The papers are ready. I just need to wait for the right moment to cut him loose. The right moment was now. The divorce wasn't just because she'd outgrown me. It was because the walls were closing in, and she needed to create distance before the explosion. I needed help. I needed someone who knew how to fight this kind of shadow war. I thought of Sarah, an old friend from university who now worked as a high-level forensic accountant. She was the only person I could trust who had the skills to untangle this mess. I grabbed my phone to call her, but as the screen lit up, I noticed something odd. A small blue icon was blinking in the corner of my status bar. It was a remote access indicator. Someone was watching my phone. Right now. A cold shiver raced down my spine. If they were watching my phone, they were probably watching the apartment. I looked up at the smoke detector in the corner of my office. A tiny pinprick of red light was buried deep inside the plastic casing. It wasn't a power light. It was a lens. I wasn't alone in the room. Even with Elena in the bedroom, I was being watched. I forced myself to breathe normally. I couldn't let them know I knew. I slowly put the phone down, making a show of yawning and rubbing my eyes. I stood up, stretched, and walked toward the door, leaving the laptop on the desk as if I were just going to the kitchen for a glass of water. As I stepped into the hallway, the elevator in our private foyer chimed. It was 3 a.m. No one should be coming up at 3 a.m. I flattened myself against the wall, peering around the corner toward the entryway. The elevator doors slid open, and two men in dark, nondescript suits stepped out. They weren't police. They didn't have the look of law enforcement. They had the look of professional cleaners, the kind that don't use bleach. One of them held a handheld scanner, similar to the one Elena had been looking for. The other reached into his jacket and pulled out a silenced pistol. "Elena said he's in the office," the one with the gun whispered. "Make it look like a heart attack. We can't have him talking to anyone before the audit starts tomorrow." My heart stopped. She wasn't just setting me up for prison. She was skipping the trial entirely. I looked down the long hallway. The only other exit was through the kitchen, but I'd have to cross their line of sight. I looked at the heavy mahogany door of the master bedroom. It was slightly ajar. Through the gap, I saw Elena. She wasn't sleeping. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, holding a glass of wine, staring at the closed-circuit feed from my office on her tablet. She watched the screen, waiting for the men to enter the frame and end our 12-year marriage for good. Then, she looked up, her eyes meeting mine through the reflection in the bedroom mirror. She didn't scream. She didn't look guilty. She just smiled, raised her glass in a silent toast, and spoke into a small radio on her nightstand. "He's in the hall," she said. "Kill him now." The word kill didn't register as a sound so much as a physical blow to my chest. For a split second, the world slowed to a crawl. I saw the lead hitman's hand tighten on the suppressed pistol. I saw the cold, expectant look on Elena's face through the mirror, and then the architect in me took over. I didn't run away from them. I ran toward the kitchen. The penthouse was a masterpiece of open-concept design, something I'd helped refine during the remodel. I knew that the kitchen island was reinforced with a 3-inch slab of industrial-grade quartz and backed by steel bracing. As the first thwip of a silenced round whistled past my ear, shattering a crystal decanter on the sideboard, I dove. I hit the hardwood floor and slid behind the island just as 2 more rounds slammed into the cabinetry above me. Wood splinters rained down on my head. My breath was a ragged, burning thing in my throat. "Check the perimeter," one of the men growled. His voice was sandpaper on gravel. "He's pinned. Don't let him get to the service door." They knew about the service door. Of course they did. Elena had given them the blueprints. I reached up, my fingers trembling, and grabbed the handle of the heavy, professional-grade dishwasher. I yanked it open, then reached behind it to the manual shut-off valve for the unit's high-pressure line. It was a quirk of the plumbing I'd complained about during the install. It was prone to bursting if the pressure wasn't regulated. I gave the valve a violent twist and kicked the intake pipe with everything I had. The copper fitting snapped. A jet of scalding hot water blasted out, filling the narrow space behind the island with a roar of steam and spray. "What the hell?" one of the men shouted, his footsteps faltering as the kitchen floor turned into a slick, steaming lake. I didn't wait. I used the distraction of the rising steam to scramble toward the pantry. Hidden behind a false panel of shelving, another architectural feature Elena had once laughed at was the manual override for the penthouse's smart fire system. I didn't trigger the sprinklers. I triggered the halon gas suppression for the server room and the kitchen's specialized stovetop. A deafening hiss filled the air as the oxygen-depleting gas flooded the kitchen zone. It wasn't enough to kill them, but it was enough to make them choke, to make their eyes sting, and to kill the visibility to zero. I held my breath until my lungs felt like they were going to burst, and I bolted. Not for the service door, they were expecting that, but for the floor-to-ceiling glass doors leading to the wraparound balcony. I burst through the doors into the freezing night air, 40 stories above the city. The wind whipped at my hair, a brutal contrast to the stifling heat of the kitchen. I didn't look down. I couldn't afford to. I ran along the narrow ledge toward the neighbor's unit, a vacant apartment currently under renovation. I reached the construction scaffolding and swung myself over the railing, my fingers slipping on the cold metal. For a terrifying second, I hung over the abyss, the lights of the city swirling beneath my feet like a neon whirlpool. I hauled myself up, my muscles screaming, and vanished into the darkness of the skeletal, half-finished unit next door. I didn't stop until I was 5 floors down, having taken the construction stairs in a blind panic. I emerged into a damp alleyway 3 blocks away, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I was shivering, soaked with sweat and gray water, and I was the most hunted man in the city. I needed to see what was on that drive, truly see it. I found a 24-hour internet cafe in a basement across town, a place that smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation. I sat in a back corner, the USB drive heavy in my hand. I plugged it in, my fingers hovering over the keys. Now that I was out of the immediate line of fire, the Project Phoenix files looked even more sinister. I bypassed the main ledger and dug into a folder marked Operational Assets. It wasn't just a list of companies, it was a list of people, judges, city council members. 2 high-ranking officers in the Financial Crimes Division of the State Police, and there, at the very bottom, was a name that made the blood drain from my face. Arthur Vance. Arthur Vance was the man who had mentored me. He was the senior partner at my architectural firm. He was the one who had introduced me to Elena 12 years ago. The realization hit me like a physical punch. This wasn't just Elena's success. This was a long-game operation that had started before I'd even said I do. I hadn't been chosen as a fall guy recently. I had been curated. My entire marriage, my career, my stability, it had all been a construction project managed by Vance and Elena to provide the perfect, boring front for a decade of high-level corruption. I clicked on a subfolder titled Insurance. Inside was a single video file. I put on the cracked plastic headphones provided by the cafe and hit play. The video was grainier than the others, taken from a hidden camera in what looked like a high-end hotel suite. Elena was there, looking younger, sitting across from a man whose face was obscured by shadow. "Mark is perfect," Elena's voice said on the recording. She sounded different, sharper, more predatory. "He's honest to a fault. He'll never look at the books because he trusts me implicitly. He'll sign whatever I put in front of him because he thinks he's supporting his wife's dreams." "And when the Phoenix Protocol is triggered?" the shadowed man asked. The voice was synthesized, distorted. "Then Mark becomes the monster," Elena said with a cold smile. "The disgruntled architect who used his wife's firm to launder money for the cartels. By the time he realizes what's happening, the offshore accounts will be empty, the evidence will be on his servers, and I'll be the grieving, betrayed spouse. He's the perfect sacrifice." The man in the shadows leaned forward, and for a split second, the light caught a very specific ring on his finger, a signet ring with a phoenix rising from the ashes. I recognized that ring. I'd seen it every day for 10 years. It didn't belong to Arthur Vance. It belonged to the district attorney, the man currently leading the investigation into Vanguard Solutions. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. The very person I was supposed to go to for help was the one who had designed my ruin. Suddenly, the computer screen flickered. A window popped up, overriding the video player. It was a simple text box with a blinking cursor. "You shouldn't have looked at the insurance file, Mark," the text read. "Now we can't just let you be the fall guy. Now you're a loose end." The cursor blinked once, twice, and then my phone, sitting on the desk next to the laptop, vibrated. I didn't pick it up. I didn't have to. The screen lit up with a new message from an unknown number. It was a photo. It was a photo of my sister Sarah sitting in her living room. She was laughing, holding a glass of wine, oblivious to the fact that a red laser dot was centered perfectly on her forehead. Below the photo was a single line of text: "The drive for her life. You have 20 minutes to get to the pier. If we see a single cop, she dies. If you're a second late, she dies. And Mark, bring the original. We'll know if it's a copy." I looked at the clock on the bottom of the computer screen. It was 4:10 a.m. The pier was 25 minutes away in the best of traffic. I stood up, my chair screeching against the floor, and turned to leave. But as I reached the door of the cafe, 2 black SUVs screeched to a halt on the sidewalk outside, blocking the exit. The doors opened, and 4 men in tactical gear stepped out. But they didn't look like Elena's hitmen. These men had FBI emblazoned in yellow across their chests. The lead agent, a woman with a face like carved granite, stepped forward, her weapon drawn. "Mark Harrison, drop the bag and put your hands behind your head," she commanded. "You're under arrest for treason and multi-state money laundering, and don't bother looking for your sister. We already have her." I looked at her, then back at the phone in my hand, where the red dot was still visible on Sarah's forehead. "You don't understand," I stammered. "The world's spinning. The DA, he's part of it. My wife. They're going to kill her." The agent's expression didn't flicker. "The DA is the one who signed the warrant for your arrest, Mr. Harrison. Now move." As they tackled me to the ground, my face pressed into the cold pavement, I saw a familiar figure standing across the street, partially hidden by the shadow of a bus stop. It was Elena. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was holding a phone to her ear, watching me with a look of pure, triumphant satisfaction. She caught my eye and blew me a kiss, just as the handcuffs ratcheted shut around my wrists. But as the agents hauled me toward the SUV, my hand brushed against the secret pocket I'd sewn into my jacket weeks ago, long before I knew how much I'd need it. The USB drive was gone. I realized with a jolt of pure electricity that the man who had accidentally bumped into me when I entered the cafe wasn't a stranger. He was the one person I had never expected to see again. The weight of the handcuffs was cold, but the weight of Elena's blown kiss was heavier. It was the ultimate gesture of her vanity, a victory lap performed while I was being ground into the dirt. As the FBI agents shoved me into the back of a black SUV, the world outside became a blur of rain and blue and red strobes. I sat between 2 agents who looked like they were made of granite. The woman from the sidewalk, Agent Miller, sat in the front passenger seat, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I told you," I said, my voice cracking. "The district attorney is involved. My sister is in danger. You're walking me straight into a trap." "Save it for the interrogation room, Harrison," Miller snapped, not looking back. "We've been tracking the Vanguard money for months. We have the wire transfers, the encrypted emails, and the witness testimony. You were the hub of the wheel. Everything went through you." "Because she put it there," I shouted, leaning forward as far as the restraints would allow. "Look at the dates. Look at the signatures. I'm an architect, not a financier. Does it make sense that a guy who spends his weekends drawing libraries is suddenly running a multinational laundering ring?" "It makes sense when that guy wants to keep up with his high-flying wife," Miller countered. "People do crazy things when they feel small, Mark. We see it every day. You felt like an anchor, so you decided to become a kingpin." The use of the word anchor hit me like a physical blow. Elena had shared our private conversations with them. She had groomed the narrative, feeding the FBI the exact psychological profile they needed to believe I was the villain. She hadn't just framed me for the crime, she had framed me for the motive. But as the SUV accelerated through the city, my mind went back to the man at the cafe, the one who had lifted the USB drive from my secret pocket. It had been Elias Thorne. 7 years ago, Elias had been Elena's mentor, the man who had originally taught her the ropes of corporate consulting. Then he had vanished under a cloud of scandal, accused of embezzling from his own clients. Elena had been the whistleblower who exposed him, launching her own career on the ruins of his. Everyone thought he was in a federal prison in Colorado, but the man who bumped into me was very much free, and he had looked at me not with the eyes of a thief, but with the eyes of a man who had been waiting for this exact moment for a very long time. If Elias had the drive, the game wasn't over. It was just changing shape. "Where are we going?" I asked, noticing we were heading away from the federal building and toward the industrial docks. "The field office is downtown." "Change of plans," Miller said, her voice tightening. "We're taking you to a secure site for processing. The DA wants you isolated until we can secure your sister." The mention of the DA sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through my veins. "The DA is V. Miller. If you take me to him, I'm a dead man. Check the Project Phoenix files. Check the signet ring." Miller finally turned around, her brow furrowing. "What signet ring?" "The Phoenix. It's on his finger in the insurance video. He's the one who authorized the contingency plan. He's not trying to arrest me, he's trying to erase me." Miller looked at the agent driving the car. A silent, tense communication passed between them. For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. She reached for her radio. "Dispatch, this is Miller. I need a secondary verification on the transport destination. We're being redirected to Warehouse 14, authorized by D.A. Vance. Confirm authorization code." The radio crackled with static. A voice came through, distorted, the same synthesized tone I'd heard on the recording. "Authorization confirmed, Agent Miller. The suspect is considered high risk. Proceed to Warehouse 14. Do not engage in further communication until arrival." Miller stared at the radio. "That didn't sound like dispatch," she whispered. Suddenly, the agent driving the SUV slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched, and I was thrown forward against the partition. Behind us, the second SUV in our convoy didn't stop. It accelerated, ramming into our rear bumper with bone-jarring force. "Ambush!" Miller screamed, reaching for her sidearm. The windows of our SUV shattered as a hail of gunfire erupted from the shadows of the surrounding warehouses. My ears rang with the deafening roar of the exchange. The agent driving slumped over the steering wheel, red blossoming across his white shirt. Miller scrambled out of the passenger door, return firing into the darkness. "Harrison, stay down!" I rolled onto the floorboards, the smell of cordite and burnt rubber filling the cramped space. Through the shattered rear window, I saw the men from the second SUV. They weren't FBI agents. They were the cleaners from the penthouse, led by the man with the gravelly voice. They moved with terrifying precision, pinning Miller behind the door of the SUV. They weren't here to rescue me. They were here to finish the job that the arrest was supposed to facilitate. In the chaos, I saw a flash of silver in the grass near the edge of the pier. A small, sleek Italian sports car pulled out of the shadows, its headlights off. It came to a halt 20 yards away. The driver's side door opened, and Elena stepped out. She wasn't wearing her power suit anymore. She was in tactical black, a sleek headset resting against her cheek. She looked toward the SUV, her eyes searching for me through the glass. She looked disappointed that I was still breathing. She spoke into her headset, her voice carrying over the sound of the gunfire. "The FBI is interfering. We don't have time for the suicide narrative. Just blow the vehicle. We'll say the cartel hit him during transport." One of the gunmen reached into his vest and pulled out a magnetic thermite charge. He began to sprint toward the SUV, staying low. I struggled with my handcuffs, my wrists bleeding as I fought the steel. "Miller, the charge, on your left!" Miller turned and fired, clipping the gunman in the shoulder, but he didn't stop. He lunged forward, slapping the charge onto the gas tank of the SUV. The timer on the device began to hum, a low, rhythmic sound that counted down the seconds of my life. "Miller, get out of here," I yelled. "The keys! Give me the keys!" Miller looked at the ticking charge, then at me. She saw the truth then, the desperation, the setup, the sheer cold-bloodedness of the woman standing by the sports car. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the handcuff keys, and threw them into the back seat. "Run, Mark!" she shouted, diving over the concrete barrier just as the gunman opened fire on her position. I fumbled for the keys on the floorboards, my fingers numb and shaking. The hum of the thermite charge rose in pitch, a high-frequency whine that signaled the end. I found the lock, twisted the key, and felt the cuffs snap open. I kicked the door open and rolled out of the SUV, hitting the wet pavement just as the world turned into a roar of orange flame. The explosion threw me 15 feet, the heat searing the back of my jacket. I hit a stack of wooden pallets, the breath leaving my lungs in a violent rush. For a moment, everything was silent, replaced by a high-pitched ringing. I looked up through the smoke. The SUV was a blackened skeleton, the fire reflecting in the dark water of the harbor. Elena was standing by her car, her face illuminated by the blaze. She looked like a demon birthed from the fire. She walked toward the wreckage, her pistol drawn, ready to put a final bullet in anything that crawled out. I tried to move, but my leg was pinned under a piece of the pallet. I was trapped, illuminated by the fire, a sitting duck. Elena stopped 10 feet away, the orange light dancing in her eyes. She raised the gun, aiming it directly at my head. "You always were an anchor, Mark," she whispered, her finger tightening on the trigger. "And today, you finally sink." She was about to fire when a new sound cut through the roar of the flames. It was the sound of a heavy engine, not a car, but a boat. A massive spotlight cut through the smoke, blinding Elena. From the darkness of the water, a voice boomed over a megaphone. A voice I hadn't heard in 7 years, but one that filled me with a sudden, sharp hope. "Elena, look at your phone. Check the news." Elena hesitated, the light burning into her. She pulled her phone from her pocket with her free hand. Her face went from triumphant to ghostly pale in a matter of seconds. "No," she breathed. "It's impossible. The encryption was mine, Elena." The voice of Elias Thorne echoed over the water. "I wrote it. Did you really think I wouldn't leave a back door in the house I built for you?" Suddenly, the city lights behind the pier flickered and died. For 3 miles in every direction, the grid went black. And then, every billboard, every digital screen, and every television in the city crackled to life. It wasn't the news, it was the insurance video. My face, Elena's face, and the district attorney's face were now being broadcast to every person in the state. But as the video played, a new set of data began to scroll over the footage. A real-time map of every offshore account, every bribe, and every Project Phoenix location. Elena screamed in rage and turned her gun toward the boat, firing blindly into the spotlight. But as she did, the ground beneath us began to vibrate. I looked toward the end of the pier, where a massive shipping container was being lowered by an automated crane, a crane that was supposed to be offline due to the blackout. The container didn't land on the dock. It swung like a wrecking ball aimed directly at Elena's car. "Elena, move!" I shouted, the instinct to save her still flickering deep inside me. She didn't hear me. She was too busy trying to kill the ghost in the water. The container smashed into the Italian sports car, crushing it like a soda can and sending a spray of glass and metal into the air. Elena was thrown back by the impact, her gun skittering across the pavement. I managed to pull my leg free and scrambled toward her, not sure if I wanted to help her or strangle her. But before I could reach her, the pier lights flashed red. a siren began to wail. Not a police siren, but a harbor emergency alarm. "The nest!" Elena gasped, clutching her side as she looked at the scrolling data on the nearby billboard. "Mark, they're triggering the nest." "What is the nest?" I demanded, grabbing her by the shoulders. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a genuine soul-deep terror I had never seen before. "It's not a list of safe houses, Mark," she choked out. "It's a kill switch. Every location on that map, they're all rigged with the same thermite charges, and your sister is at the primary site." She looked at her watch. "We have 12 minutes before the entire evidence trail, and everyone in those buildings is vaporized." Just then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a video call. I swiped the screen. It was Sarah. She was tied to a chair in a room filled with crates labeled Vanguard Solutions. Behind her, a digital timer was counting down. 11:59, 11:58. And standing behind her, holding a remote detonator, was Arthur Vance. He looked into the camera and smiled. "Hello, Mark. I believe you have something of mine. Or rather, Elias does. Tell him to bring the drive to the old shipyard, or Sarah becomes the first spark of the Phoenix." The pier was a graveyard of twisted metal and smoking rubber. Elena lay on the cold concrete, clutching her side, the fire from her ruined car casting long, dancing shadows across her face. She looked at me, and for the first time in 3 years, I didn't see the global woman or the corporate titan. I saw the frightened girl who had once shared cheap takeout with me on a studio apartment floor. But that girl was a ghost, and the woman in front of me was a monster. "Mark," she wheezed, you have to give them what they want. If the nest goes up, we all burn, not just Sarah, the evidence, the accounts, everything I built." "You didn't build anything, Elena," I said, my voice as cold as the harbor wind. "You just borrowed it from people who break things for a living." The spotlight from Elias Thorne's boat swung toward us. The heavy rumble of the engine grew louder as the bow nudged against the pier. Elias jumped onto the dock, the silver USB drive glinting in his hand. He looked older, his face lined with the bitterness of a man who had spent 7 years in the dark, but his eyes were sharp. "Mark, we don't have time," Elias said, ignoring Elena as if she were a piece of discarded trash. "Vance isn't just going to blow the building. He's going to trigger a digital wipe. If those servers at the shipyard go down before I finish the upload, your name stays on every illicit document. You'll be the only one the feds can find." "I know the shipyard," I said, the blueprints of the city flashing through my mind like a HUD. "I did the structural survey for the retrofit 2 years ago. Vance thinks he's in a fortress, but that building has a pneumatic waste system that runs directly under the main server room." "Get in the boat," Elias commanded. I looked back at Elena. She reached out a hand, her fingers trembling. "Take me with you, Mark. I can stop him. I know the codes." I looked at the FBI SUV, the one Agent Miller had dived away from. She was standing up now, her weapon drawn, her face a mask of fury. She stepped toward Elena, the handcuffs already out. "She's all yours, Miller," I called out. I didn't look back as I jumped onto Elias's boat. The ride to the shipyard was a blur of salt spray and adrenaline. The timer on my phone was at 8:42. Elias was hunched over a laptop, his fingers flying across the keys as he battled the DA's digital safeguards. "I'm leaking the offshore ledgers in real time," Elias shouted over the roar of the engine. "The money is vanishing, Mark. Every cent they stole is being redirected to a global escrow for the victims of their consulting scams. Vance is watching his empire dissolve. That's why he's going to kill your sister. He has nothing left to lose." We hit the shipyard docks at 5:15. The old industrial complex loomed over us like a Victorian tomb. I didn't wait for Elias. I grabbed a heavy wrench from the boat's toolkit and sprinted toward the service entrance. I knew the layout by heart. While Elena had been out networking, I had been studying the guts of the city. I bypassed the main elevators. They'd be rigged or monitored, and headed for the ventilation shafts. I climbed through the narrow, dusty ducts, the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. I emerged in the rafters of the main warehouse at 2:30. Below me, the scene was exactly as it had appeared on the video call. Sarah was tied to the chair, her eyes wide with terror. Arthur Vance stood 5 feet away, his signet ring catching the light as he checked his watch. He was holding a dead man's switch. If his thumb moved, the building and my sister would be gone. "He's not coming, Arthur," Sarah whispered, her voice brave despite the tears. "He's smarter than you think." "He's an architect, Sarah," Vance sneered. "He builds boxes. I build worlds. He'll come because he's an anchor. He's tethered to people like you, and that's why he'll die with you." "Actually, Arthur," I shouted from the rafters, "I'm more of a foundations guy." I didn't wait for him to look up. I kicked the release lever on the heavy industrial fire suppression canister I'd loosened. The 20-pound steel cylinder plummeted 30 feet, guided by the very gravity Vance thought he'd mastered. It didn't hit Vance. It hit the power junction box behind him. The warehouse exploded in a shower of blue sparks. The magnetic locks on the doors hissed open, and the digital timer on the wall flickered and died. But the dead man's switch was still in his hand. Vance roared in frustration and lunged towards Sarah, but the darkness was my ally. I dropped from the rafters, landing on a stack of shipping crates and diving into a roll. I tackled him just as he raised the detonator. We crashed into the server racks, the smell of ozone and hot plastic filling the air. Vance was stronger than he looked, his rage giving him a frantic, desperate energy. He slammed his fist into my jaw, sending me reeling. "You ruined everything," he screamed, his thumb hovering over the red button. 10 years of planning, millions of dollars, all gone because of a boring suburban architect. "Not just me, Arthur," I gasped, wiping blood from my lip. "Look at the screens." The monitors on the server racks, powered by the backup batteries, were showing a live feed of the city. The video of the DA was gone. In its place was a scrolling list of every bribe Arthur Vance had ever taken, every building code he'd bypassed, and every life he'd ruined to clear a path for Vanguard Solutions. And at the bottom of the screen, a message from Elias: "Upload complete. The world knows everything." Vance looked at the screen, his face collapsing into a mask of pure despair. He looked at the detonator in his hand. He realized that even if he blew the building, the truth was already out. He was a ghost. "I'll see you in hell, Mark," he whispered, and he pressed the button. Nothing happened. I smiled, even though my mouth was full of blood. "I told you, Arthur. I did the retrofit survey. I knew where the master bypass for the demolition charges was located. I cut the wire 5 minutes ago while I was in the vents." Vance slumped against the server rack, the detonator falling from his nerveless fingers. I ran to Sarah, slicing through her zip ties with a pocket knife. She collapsed into my arms, sobbing. I held her tight, the weight of the last 12 years finally lifting from my shoulders. Outside, the sirens were approaching, real sirens this time. A fleet of black and whites swirled into the shipyard, led by a very battered, very angry Agent Miller. 6 months later, the dust has finally settled. Arthur Vance and the district attorney are currently awaiting trial on a litany of charges ranging from racketeering to attempted murder. Because Elias Thorne provided the unencrypted master files, every document Elena tried to pin on me was proven to be a forgery. I wasn't the mastermind. I was the primary witness. Elena is serving 25 years in a federal penitentiary. I went to see her once shortly after the sentencing. She sat behind the glass, her designer clothes replaced by a drab orange jumpsuit. She looked smaller than I remembered. "I could have made us gods, Mark," she said, her voice still carrying that hint of polished arrogance. "We could have had it all." "I already have it all, Elle," I told her. "I have my sister, I have my integrity, and I have a house that's built on actual stone, not a pile of stolen cash." I walked away and didn't look back. Elias Thorne vanished again, of course. The morning after the shipyard, a package arrived at my new office. Inside was a small, hand-drawn sketch of a phoenix and a thumb drive containing a consulting fee. Enough to start my own firm, focused on low-income housing and community projects. I'm still an architect. I still design libraries and community centers. Elena called me an anchor, thinking it was an insult. But she forgot one thing about anchors. An anchor is the only thing that keeps a ship from drifting into the rocks when the storm hits. And now that the storm is over, I'm finally enjoying the calm.